Well, my name is Tommy Halferty, to start with. It's like, okay, then that might sound like a northern name, and in fact it is. It is. I was born in Derry a long time ago, 1945, 12th of October. Yeah. I suppose in a way, looking back now on it, since you asked me that question, I think one of the things that really struck out was that I was born into a musical environment, which meant simply in the family, my sister played the piano, my brother played the piano, and I was the last of 8 children. So it was a very musical environment to grow up in. And I think maybe one of the things that did strike me while music was playing, it was classical music, of course, there was some jazz. Well, my older brother played some Duke Ellington, when I'm reflecting on it now, but it didn't affect me in the same way as the music that I heard outside the household. The music I heard outside the house was the music of Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles. And I think one of those photographs you can see is in a fairly ramshackle place where we're all listening and to somebody playing the guitar. And he's actually playing a Jimi Hendrix song, you know that. So between the outside and the inside, I was generally growing up in a musical environment. There was a friend of my brother again, yeah, Jamie, you know, he's since passed away. He brought a guitar which he left in the house, but this time at least not in the special attic room that was his studio, which was more or less in the sitting room. And this was made of wood. It's in that photograph that I think it was an awful looking guitar. It was all, it had a little sort of a white thing which was acting as you know, it wasn't really that important. Somebody obviously said, I'll draw this little white thing because it's all in wood and make it look better, you know. The guitar outside the 3rd fret was not in tune. You can make it sound like a jet aeroplane one time, or you can make it sound like, you know, some little snake crawling up the back end of it. It was just incredible, ooh, you know, and all that sound. It never was in tune, and even if you tried to tune it in octaves, you know, it was never in tune. So, but it was there, and this is, of course, the first time I could really sit down and play a guitar without getting hit over the head by some larger forms of, you know, anything like that, you know.
I booked a concert hall, John Field room, as I would as a classical musician. And we had this date of duo concert in about 6 months' time, that time. So we rehearsed a lot, basically, and I was really, I have to say, I didn't know what I was doing, but I had a great fun, because when I play with Tommy, you just learn a lot from just playing with him, because he's got this amazing energy, you know, and you just play and you just kind of sucked into this energy, and then you feel like you can play. So
a lot of my friends were not into music. They were into football, and they were into people like Georgie Best, and which I must say I was influenced by that as well. So I think you know, the usual like 14, 15, 16, I wasn't really playing so much music, but then I entered the seminary, and in that case, I had two people. I had Colin Kelly, who's still alive, and this guy is very important in the world of jazz today, because he officiated in people's day. He became a priest. I didn't actually continue, but he became a priest. And Colin actually was one of these guys in the seminary. He knew every pop group, he knew all the members, and he knew all the songs, you know. And the other guy was Pat. This guy, Pat Davis, was his name? Yeah. And he was an amazing footballer. He played for Home Farm before he went in. So, you know, he's very good. And so those two sort of interests that I had, you know, just the music and the football, we kept that going. But Pat played a very good guitar. He knew all the Beatles songs, and he played all the right chords. So he was left-handed. I always remember he was left-handed. He looked like didn't look like Paul McCartney, but he played left-handed. And I learned a lot from just playing the right chords, and he taught me a lot. So I started then to get better on the guitar in the seminary. And then my mother, when I came home one summer, she said, I said, can you give me some pocket money? She said, what for? I said, I want to buy a guitar. And I went to Belfast, and the name, Crimmins, I think was the name of the shop, and I bought a guitar, and I brought it back to the seminary. And so the two of us then started to play together, and we played all the Beatles songs, you know, She Loves You, all those kind of songs. And it was really just getting we could do that. And the two things that really knocked me out, between Colin telling me all the names of the groups, you know, I never heard of Cream, and he says, do you know who's in Cream? And he would tell me all the names. I wouldn't know all those. That's why I knew I would know them now, you know. So of course, when I got the electric guitar, I started playing all the stuff that I heard. Apache, you know, you played, because the Shadows were very popular at the time, you know, Cliff Richard and the Shadows, so I played all that time. There was one tune I loved by the Shadows called Man of Mystery, and that was hard to play. So if you could play that, you immediately were completely moved from the lower division of the guitar players around the place. You moved up, yeah. You're playing first division, you know, and that was good. Also, at 10, the electric guitar, the sound, getting a good sound, getting an amp that worked without, and then people playing natural distortion, you know, just using the amp and all that. We were just experimenting, you know. That didn't really come till after I left the seminary.
It's incredibly exciting and energizing when you're in the room with Tommy playing, when you see him live and you experience that, because there's a warmth in it, and there's, you know, and obviously, like what we all wanted to hear. We were young boys. What we wanted to hear was, we want to hear guitars that were loud and slightly distorted and played really fast. And Tommy was delivering on all those, you know.
But the breakthrough was my sister, and I think this was the great thing, because I didn't want to go home, because you could imagine going home to your mother and say, I'm leaving, you know, the reaction at home wouldn't have been exactly that very welcoming. So I thought I would soften the blow by going to my sister first, and I said, listen, she thought I was just coming out for a break, and I said, I think I'm giving it, you know, I'm leaving and all that. And she said, yeah, and it's probably because I was there in the house, and, you know, maybe she thought I was feeling sorry for myself, but she said, do you want to hear some music? And I said, yeah, great, that's a great idea. And the interesting thing there was that she brought me, I still remember today, it was in Rogers and Keys in Dublin, really part of the dock. It's still there, you can still see the actual bar. It was called Kelly's, and in fact, when she brought me in, she was the only woman in the place when we went in. And of course, immediately she would, oh, good Lord, yeah. And so I sit down, and I at this stage, you could imagine like a 19, 20-year-old sullen sophisticate from the, you know, the seminary, looking at all these dockers, if they say, oh God, you know, what am I doing here? But the minute I walked in, and then we felt the music started, and I recognized the song straight away. It was Take the Last Train to Clarksville, because it was a popular song by the Monkees, but there was this guitar player playing it in a jazz, you know, and that was Louis Stewart. And then, stupidly enough, I went up innocently, I said, do you give lessons, you know? And Louis said, yeah. But nothing else was said. And I said, well, do you mind if I get some lessons of you, you know? So I always remember said, meet me in Nordale Canes on a Tuesday or something like that. I always remember, because Nordale Canes, I didn't know, was it the name of a street or what? Obviously. So I remember my sister, we found out it was a warehouse. It was a famous warehouse, and he booked the top room. He rented the top room to give classes, and it was in Cable Street. And the only connection with Cable Street was great was that Slattery's was a pub where he used to play, and that's what I'm talking now. That's like the late 60s and 70s. Yeah, I eventually got 6 lessons of Louis, which was great. The thing that I learned with Louis most was not so much how to improvise, but chordal melody, playing a song with chords in a jazz fact. That really knocked me out. But he was a master. He could orchestrate just, no matter if you say Danny Boy, he would just take the guitar and just play an amazing arrangement of this chordal melody. And so that's what the 6 lessons were that. I didn't really get involved with scales so much and that.
And I think to me this is the sign of a really good original musician. You know it's Tommy within 2 bars. You hear anything Tommy's recorded, you go, that's Tommy Halferty. And Tommy was compared to Louis a lot of the time in the early days, but Tommy's a completely different player. He is a completely different player. He's his own man and very unique and completely identifiable. And I think we all should be emulating that as musicians rather than being a clone of somebody else. And I suppose the brilliance in a lot of people is they don't even know they're themselves, they're just themselves. And Tommy is one of those guys.
And while I wasn't working for it, while I had to leave my sister's, because she kept me for it, she was very good. I stayed then with, actually, would you believe it or not, I was in an apartment with Bill Whelan, who wrote The River Dance. Yeah, that was just in the square there. That was there. I was there for 6 months, actually, of which he himself, I was great because I could practice every day, I did owe him a lot of rent, and I used to show him some chords. In his book, he mentions me, he used to take some of my chords and use them himself, and I told him he should really study music, and I think that's what he did. He went back to the academy and so on, and so he set himself up there. So we were quite, and we used to play down in the pub, Lansdowne Road, and there was a jam session every Thursday night. We used to play. He used to sing Beatles songs. I played with him. And in guys, one day Gary Moore walked in and played with us. He was playing with Colosseum, but he came back to Dublin. He was from Belfast and used to come down. The other aspect of my life at that stage, I met Annie, my wife is French, and we started a family. And then obviously she was just working in the French school and all that. So it was just, the decision of whether I was going to get as they say, a 9-to-5 job. Was I going to continue with the music? Was I going to become a professional musician or not? So this was the dichotomy in my head that I had to deal with at that time. And so the first thing I did, because under pressure, I suppose, because somebody even like Louis Stewart, the problem of being a full-time, he played, but he made his money teaching at this stage, because even to get a house, if you said you were a musician, a jazz musician, the bank wouldn't give you a mortgage or a loan, all that. And so Annie was the breadwinner at the time, so I just felt, okay, so I remember I went back and I did what we call the hitch dip. The hitch dip was your qualification to teach in a secondary school. I had a degree already, you see, and all that. So I did that down in Maynooth.
You need a couple of things to be a good educator in jazz. You need to know the knowledge, but you also need to have the respect of your students. And Tommy's practical ability gives him that respect. You go see Tommy play, if that makes sense. And he's got a phenomenal, facility on the instrument. Of course, one of the things that trio did, which is really very important actually in the development of Irish jazz, is they played original music. That's a hugely important part of the development of the music, because people weren't doing that up to that point. Everyone was playing standard tunes.
But I still really, I used to steal out to hear Louis. He was still playing. Sometimes he was going off, he was playing in London and all that. And then he left for a while and he went to play with Ronnie Scott's and all. But there was nobody of that caliber I could hear playing jazz at the time. There were other people playing like Noel Keelan and Jim Doherty, but maybe the guitar was the guitar and Louis was. What I tried then to do was this. Having gone to hear Louis, I was being rather bold. I used to record. I bought one of the most expensive Sony Walkman, which you could record well, And then instead of not getting Louis, I would start practicing this at home. I would listen to the tunes he played on the live gig and try to imitate. And this was the start of my transcription, you know, of listening to, then buying more records. And then, could you imagine, if you didn't have any slow down, or you would go back on a vinyl to hear that again, so it was just a waste of time. So I recorded on my, and then keep listening to, you would saturate your head with it sitting on the train or something like that. So all that kind of working on your own at home, trying to keep up, and then buying records. And then all of a sudden, I just found myself, I was buying records, not just of jazz. I was buying like John McLaughlin playing Indian music, or Mahavishnu. I was listening to rock. I was listening to all sorts, as well as, of course, the jazz. So the whole, I suppose mainly it was a lot of guitar music. But I was learning it, just being a autodidactic, learning how to just try and put this stuff together myself, you know. But it kept me in such a way that my mind was open to hear all different styles of music at the time. That was, I think that was very important. I wasn't, because I know there were all the guitar players, they just continued in that line. And I was willing to open up a little bit more and include these other great guitar players of the time. And even like people were talking earlier about Larry Coryell, I bought all his records, Spaces, I had all those records. And it was kind of fusion, and then fusion came into all that, and I was equally interested in fusion as straight ahead jazz, you know.
I just think Tommy is an incredibly important figure in Irish jazz history. The sheer volume of work, as I've said previously, the sheer volume of work he's done, the quality of work he's done, the internationalization, and maybe I didn't mention that, you know, his connection with France and the various pieces, playing with Lee Konitz he played with. I mean, he showed by playing with Lee Konitz, Marshall Solal, and other people in that ilk, that and the many guys he's played with in France, that he's an absolutely international world-class player. And to have a guy of that caliber, week on week, producing music on the scene for over 40 years is an incredible achievement and an incredibly important factor in the evolution of jazz on this island.
Open your heart, you're no longer free.